صباح الخير. مبسوطين احنا معاكم النهارده ومبسوطين ان احنا هنبدا اليوم النهارده. سعداء بوجود معالي الوزيره دكتور نيفين قباج وحضرتك وسعداء جدا من كل الحضور معانا النهارده. استاذنكم تتفضلوا على البانل. مهندسه نوره، دكتور نيفين، مارينا وورلد بانك كانتري دايركتور اند اليسون فاهي. لو ممكن تفضلوا على البانل. صباح الخير يا دكتور. حضرتك عامله ايه؟ ازي حضرتك؟ الله يخليك. طب احنا سعداء جدا احنا موجودين النهارده مع بعض. احنا في الثلاث ايام دول هنتكلم على قضايا في منتهى الاهميه. هنتكلم على رعايه الطفوله المبكره، هنتكلم على female labor force participation او مشاركه السيدات في سوق العمل، وهنتكلم على الشراكه واهميتها في مجال التنميه، وازاي نقدر كشركاء مع بعض نقدم نموذج يخدم اهداف الدوله واهداف الوزاره ويحقق اثر حقيقي على المجتمع. النهارده السيشن بالشراكه مع البنك الدولي وبالشراكه مع طبعا وزاره التضامن الاجتماعي وجيبال. هنكون بنتكلم فيها اكتر عن اولا عن نتائج القياس الاثر الاول اللي احنا عملناه، واللي هو الاول من نوعه الحقيقي، اللي كان بيقيس اثر تقديم مساعدات ماليه للاسر على التحاق الابناء ووجودهم داخل حضانات، وكمان فرص عرض او ربط امهات بسوق العمل على التحقهم بسوق العمل. هنتكلم كتير النهارده وهرجع لكم بعد شويه بطاقيه تانية، طاقيه الباحث. بس هسيب دلوقتي الفرصه لمهندسه نورة سليم انها تبدا كلمتها وترحب بالساده الضيوف. شكرا.
صباح الخير. شكرا عبد الرحمن. سعيدة جدا بوجود وتعاون مؤسسة ساويرس للتنمية الاجتماعية مع شركاء دايما بنعتز بالعمل معاهم، وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي والوزيرة الدكتورة نيفين القباج اللي دايما بتدعم العمل التنموي الجاد والفعال. بشكر حضرتك على حضورك. البنك الدولي ومعمل عبد اللطيف جميل لمكافحة الفقر. مؤسسة ساويرس مشاركة النهاردة لاهتمامها الشديد بالمواضيع الثلاثة اللي هنركز عليهم في الورشة. أولاً الأطفال وكل ما يخص نمو وصحة الأطفال وخاصة في السنين الأولى الفارقة. ثانياً التعليم، ومن بداية يمكن تأسيس المؤسسة من 2001 وهي اهتمت أن يكون القضية الرئيسية اللي بتركز عليها هو دعم التعليم، ولغاية التعليم العالي والتعليم التنفيذي، ولكن استراتيجيتنا في الفترة الحالية والفترة القادمة هتركز على الطفولة المبكرة والتعليم في المراحل ما قبل الابتدائي. ثالثاً الاستثمار في رصد الأثر والتعلم وتصميم ودعم البرامج المبنية على أدلة علمية. ودي حقيقي رحلة احنا بدأناها بالتعاون مع معمل عبد اللطيف جميل في 2015 ومستمرين فيها. أنشأنا إدارة للغرض ده في مؤسسة ساويرس، وهي إدارة التعلم والاستراتيجيات اللي بيديرها زميلي الأستاذ عبد الرحمن ناجي، وفخورة بكونه باحث مشارك في الدراسة اللي هيتعرض نتائجها النهاردة. خلال شهر المرأة احنا لازلنا بنطمح وبنعمل من أجل مشاركة أعظم للمرأة في العمل. في مصر طبعا لا تزال نسب التحاق المرأة في السوق العمل منخفضة جدا على الرغم من تفوقها في مجال التعليم والتعليم العالي. إتاحة طبعا حضانات عالية الجودة هو إتاحة لفرصة لنمو ذهني ونمو اجتماعي للطفل، ولكن هي أيضا إتاحة فرصة للمرأة للالتحاق بسوق العمل. طموحنا بالتعاون مع وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي وكل الشركاء العاملين في الطفولة المبكرة إن كل طفل يبقى عنده فرصة إن يكون في حضانة عندها القدرة الحقيقية لتنمية مهاراته في بيئة صحية وآمنة، ونتطلع لكل المناقشات اللي هتحصل على مدار الثلاث أيام عشان نتعلم من الأدلة اللي من الدراسة ونشوف نقدر نتعاون إزاي لتحقيق الحلم ده ويكون لينا مشاركة فعالة في الطفولة المبكرة. شكرا جزيلا. ميرسي.
شكرا جزيلا مهندسة نور على الكلمة بتاعتها. ودلوقتي هيكون فرصة ان احنا نتعرف اكتر مرة تانية وثالثة ورابعة على الشريك الاستراتيجي لمؤسسة ساويرس، هو معمل عبد اللطيف جميل لمكافحة الفقر. فيكون معانا كلمة أليسون فاهي Executive Director for JPAL.
Thank you, Abdurrahman, and thanks very much to our wonderful partners on this study from the Ministry of Social Solidarity, the World Bank, IZA, and the Sawiris and JPAL MENA teams who have worked together on this impact evaluation. So I'm Alison Fahey. I'm the Executive Director of JPAL MENA, and I'm pleased to do a brief introduction to JPAL as an organization to orient your understanding of who we are, what we're doing with our impact evaluations in Egypt with our partners, and how this study fits into that work. I click to move ahead. Okay, perfect. Let's see. All right, so for those who are unfamiliar, JPAL, or the Abdelatif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, is a research center whose mission is to reduce poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by rigorous scientific evidence. Here in the MENA region, JPAL MENA is based at the American University in Cairo, and we are the hub for JPAL's work in 3 key dimensions. So at the heart of the work that we do is research. We conduct randomized control trials, a form of rigorous impact evaluation, to understand the impact of development and social programs and policies with our network of more than 260 affiliated professors. We conduct policy outreach to share what we're learning from those impact evaluations, to get those lessons in the hands of ministers who have questions and their teams who are trying to design the most innovative and most effective programs. And we also conduct capacity building, something that we did with some of the partners here in the room to strengthen the understanding of how to generate and use evidence in decision making. And we did this together with Ngos, actually in this building just a couple of months ago. So those are some of the core activities that we're doing as JPAL, and today's event brings a lot of these together. So you'll hear about the preliminary results of an important research project on the impact of access to subsidized nurseries. And we'll also share some of the global evidence and the lessons that we're learning that can help to inform early childhood development and female labor force participation policy. So a little bit more about JPAL. So I mentioned we have this global network of more than 260 affiliated professors from more than 50 universities around the world, and they are united in their use of randomized evaluations to inform policy. We're very pleased to have with us today Bruno Crepon and Caroline Kraft, who represent this research network on the impact evaluation that we're doing together. Our co-founders and co-directors, Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, together with Michael Kramer, won the Nobel Prize for this work in 2019 for the ways that this has helped us to dramatically improve our ability to fight poverty in practice with evidence. So as I mentioned, JPAL MENA is our regional hub for JPAL's work here in the region, and we are one of 7 regional offices based around the world that give us a local grounding for the work that we do. And this is complemented by the global knowledge base that we're able to build upon. Over the past nearly 20 years, JPAL-affiliated professors have conducted more than 1,100 rigorous impact evaluations, many on this nexus of education, healthcare, gender, and employment. So there's a tremendous global knowledge base that we have and that we can draw on to inform policy decisions. Drawing on that global knowledge base, today more than 500 million people have been reached by the scale-up of evidence-informed policy around the world as one way of thinking about the impact of our work. So when you look at this map, each dot on the map represents an individual impact evaluation. And what you might notice is that there are a lot of dots in some places and relatively few in Egypt and in the MENA region. So one of the goals of JPAL MENA is to increase the locally generated and locally relevant impact evaluation evidence to help inform policy design and decision making. And so that's what leads directly into the collaboration that we'll talk about today. So JPAL MENA and the Ministry of Social Solidarity finalized an MOU in 2021, actually. And we launched an impact evaluation to understand the effect of subsidizing nursery access on children and on their mothers' decisions to work. So that evaluation has been taking place with support from Menagil at the World Bank and from IZA with support from the UK Embassy here. We think that this is tremendously important work because these are critical questions globally, but they also directly are addressing government priorities here in Egypt to increase women's participation in the labor market, to strengthen children's cognitive and socio-emotional skills development. And so we are just thrilled, of course, to be able to work with the ministry on this, and the commitment both from the minister and from her entire team to generate this evidence and to really implement evidence-based and evidence-driven social protection and social solidarity policy is what makes us value this partnership so very much. So we're very pleased to be able to share with you a bit more from Caroline about the global evidence, and then from Bruno and Abdurrahman about the lessons that we're learning here in Egypt. And one final note that I'll make is this is an individual impact evaluation, and actually on Thursday, many of us will gather together to launch the Egypt Impact Lab, which is learning from our experience on this study to say, let's do so much more of this in government. And so with support from the Sawiris Foundation, we hope to be able to launch several more impact evaluations of major government priorities, just like the one that we'll talk about today. So with that, I look forward to the rest of our discussion, and thanks very much for having us here.
شكرا جزيلا أليسن فاهي على كلمتها. والحقيقة بعد ما بسمع كلمة جيبال وكلمة مؤسسة ساويرس الحقيقة الواحد سعيد جدا إن بيشوف المؤسستين والكيانين دول متوافقين قد إيه في أهدافهم في رؤيتهم عشان خاطر يقدروا يتكاملوا في تحقيق الأثر وتعظيم الإمباكت. وعشان لو عايزين نتكلم فعلا على تعظيم الإمباكت وماكسمايزنج الإمباكت وإن احنا نشوف أثر أكبر للأعمال التنموية وللتكامل، مهم جدا نسمع كمان من الورلد بانك. فهطلب من مس مارينا ويس ان هي تقول كلمتها عن البنك الدولي.
Thank you very much, and good morning. It's really my pleasure to be here today, to be part of this very important discussion on evidence-based policy making, including to advance gender issues and education issues. I think this is an extremely timely discussion, also in light of the many challenges all of us currently face. So let me start on a positive note, and I want to wish everybody here and everybody in Egypt a very happy Women's Month. As you may know, this year's International Women's Day theme is Gender Equality Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. And of course, this is in recognition of the contribution of women and girls around the world who are leading the efforts on climate change adaptation, mitigation, and response to build a more sustainable future for all of us. For us at the World Bank, both organizationally but also through our operations, gender equality, of course, remains one of our top priorities. Along with our development partners, and it's great to have some of you in the room today, we aim to drive transformative change, including through our year-long Accelerate Equality initiative, which explores all the important progress that has been made and the lessons that have been learned to date over the past 10 years. And it's exactly 10 years ago that the World Bank put out its World Development Report on gender equality and development, and those two are extremely closely linked, gender equality and development. We are here today at the first day of this very important 3-day workshop to discuss the issue of early childhood development, and previous speakers have already commented on that. I think many of you know that investments during children's early years play a significant role, almost a disproportionately significant role, in improving human capital formation and in reducing poverty later in life. Evidence that we have from rigorous evaluations suggests that supporting the development children in the 0 to 5 age bracket in particular has a range of positive outcomes on health, on education, that last well into adulthood and are sometimes also passed on to future generations. So we are big advocates of early childhood development, and I think I'm speaking to an audience that is convinced of that as well. There's also a strong link between investing in early childhood development and female labor force participation, and this is of course also relevant in the Egyptian context. And today I'm proud to be here in the room launching the results of the impact evaluation funded by the World Bank's Middle East and North Africa Gender Innovation Lab and conducted by JPAL in partnership with the Ministry of Social Solidarity on childcare subsidies, employment services, and women's labor market outcomes in Egypt. Our event today also coincides with the most recent launch of the World Bank 2022 Women, Business and the Law report, which looks at laws and regulation that affect women's economic opportunity in 190 economies around the world, and it includes an analysis of some of the issues that we are discussing today. The event today also builds on some of the recommendations of the World Bank's 2019 Egypt Women Economic Empowerment Study that was jointly prepared in collaboration with the National Council for Women and with the generous support of the UK Embassy. As we already discussed, international literature and evidence from Egypt highlight that access to childcare, or rather the lack thereof, is a major obstacle to female labor force participation. In fact, a lack of access to affordable childcare facilities is a key challenge hindering many women from entering and remaining in the labor market. The coverage for nurseries in Egypt is currently estimated at 8% in the 0 to 4 years old category, and 31% for preschools, 4 to 6 years. So there's a lot of untapped potential that could be turned into a lucrative business for the private sector with double benefits, since these childcare facilities could also enable the employment of women and allow mothers to re-enter productively the labor force. The randomized control trial with JPAL was designed to test the impact of childcare subsidies, employment services, and their impact on labor market outcomes of Egyptian women. I want to wrap up, but just wanted to highlight that at the World Bank we are currently working on our next 5-year World Bank Group Government of Egypt partnership, and some of the issues that we're discussing today are absolutely central to that partnership. I wish to extend a special thanks to Her Excellency Dr. Naveen for partnering with us to support this evidence-based study, and for all her efforts to promote early childhood development. And of course, we have a close partnership in many other areas as well. I also wish to extend our sincere thanks to the JPAL team for enriching data and research in Egypt, for putting on the table the importance of evidence-based policy making, in particular around ECD and female labor force participation, And last but not least, special thanks to the Sawiris Foundation for leading and coordinating efforts to promote childhood development in Egypt. At the World Bank, we are proud to support Egypt on its ambitious development inclusive journey, and we're committed to partnering with Egypt in whatever way we can to support your journey. I look forward to the discussions today.
Thank you so much, Marina. دلوقتي احنا الحقيقة سمعنا من مؤسسة تنموية مصرية زي مؤسسة ساويرس، وكمان سمعنا من مركز بحثي مرموق زي معمل عبد اللطيف جاي من مكافحة الفقر، وكمان سمعنا لشريك كل المشروعات القومية في مصر وفي دول العالم كله، البنك الدولي. وده الحقيقة اللي احنا بنسميه الشراكة الفاعلة اللي ممكن فعلا تكون بتماكسمايز الامباكت. وزي ما قالت مارينا الحقيقة مهم جدا لينا كساويرس فاونديشن ان احنا ندعم تنمية رعاية الطفولة المبكرة، واحنا الحقيقة سعداء بان احنا نكون بننسق الجهود وندعمها على المستوى القومي في كل وقت، ونكون كوميتد لدوت في السنين الجاية ان شاء الله. دلوقتي يجي الفرصة والوقت ان نسمع استاذتي ومعلمتي الدكتورة نيفين قباش، وزيرة التضامن الاجتماعي. سعيد جدا ان بسمع حضرتك، وصعب عليا قوي ان انا اقدم حضرتك يعني، فتشرفينا يا فندم.
خليه مش مشكلة. صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning everybody. It's a great pleasure always to be with you, and many thanks to our dear partner, the World Bank, especially Marina West and Nahla Zaytoun and all of the other partners, and our very dear partner Sawiris Foundation, with all the efforts that they're investing with the Ministry of Social Solidarity in so many fields and arenas, and the highly reputable JPAL Foundation, especially our JPAL team, that I really recognize their efforts, because I do believe in impact evaluation and in research and evidence-based policies, and it's not the first time to deal and to partner also with Alison. So thank you very much for being here and for extending your partnership. It started earlier in the World Bank, Takaful and Karama, when we did primarily the process evaluation and then the baseline, and we're doing the impact evaluation and another one for FOSA program. So actually it is aligned with the government orientation towards poverty alleviation, social protection policies, also investment in human capital, because it's not only, as I will forward later, it's not only an education or childhood issues, it's an economic issue as well. So I think investment in human capital is one of the basic policies that the government is leading right now, and also human rights. So I think equal opportunities for education in all areas, disaggregated by geographic area, by age category, by social class, by everything. So it's basic human rights to receive education and to have early childhood development. So it meets with so many priorities that the government is leading, and the Ministry of Social Solidarity puts this as one of its main priorities for the coming period. We've established around 1,100 nurses the last 1.5 years, and we're looking forward to establish another 3,000, but we have many other issues rather than the number of nurses. Let me start first with one of the main mottos or statements that I do like, that providing early childhood development is both moral right and economically smart. So it's not only moral, it's economic, and it's human rights. The question is, and it's put by the World Bank president, how do we expect employees to invest in a country if its workplace is not sufficiently developed physically or cognitively? So governments that don't invest in skilled, healthy, productive workforce are harming their future economic growth. So actually it's a combination of factors, but when we see many villages that are basically deprived of nurseries and of early childhood development, it's not fair to us as people who are working in development, whatever our affiliation is, government, international organizations, NGOs, and I warmly welcome the international partners also with us in the same room, and our dear NGOs who are implementing with us every single national program. I know how much effort they're investing in this, the civil society in Egypt. It's not only because 2022, but they're ever were giving, and I'm sure that they will remain and they will invest in this opportunity of 2022. So let me share some of the basic information that by the age of 3, a child's brain is developed at 80% of the child brain is developed, only by 3 years. So if we're investing in only 3 years, we're investing in 80% of the brain development. 20% in Egypt suffer from stunting, which leaves negative effect on brain development, health, fitness, and retention in schools. So it's not a childhood issue, it's school, it's health, it's overall social protection. Children who escape stunting are 33% more likely to escape poverty as adults. So it's a sort of poverty alleviation program. We're targeting it too early, proactively in these early years. Preschool programs that specially target vulnerable groups can result in a rate of return of 7 to 16% annually. And for every $1 invested in nutrition, a country can get $16 in return. So, and that's why it's moral and economic. Thus, the impact of failing to improve nutrition is reflected globally in the form of losses of US $3.5 trillion per year. That makes $500 per person. The first 1,000 days is the most important, and that's why we gave the 3,000 days much importance even in Hayat Karima program, because the first 1,000 days, and many people ask me, why do you care as Ministry of Social Solidarity on health issues and on the first 1,000 days and on breastfeeding? This is a health issue, but actually the borders are broken. Now the social protection is overall inclusive set of rights, health, education, cognitive, and that is related to the human at large. And that's why we tackle poverty from a multidimensional perspective and not from a monetary perspective. Otherwise, people will not get out of the poverty vicious circle. So I think, let me also share with you that I agree with Marina West that the coverage is only 8%, which is decreasing. I mean, 3-4 years ago, it was 10%. Now it decreased after COVID-19. And this is why we put it as a main priority for the coming period. We also facilitated many of the issues of the bureaucratic and logistical issues of licensing, because we have 10,800 nurses that are not licensed, and we have around 15 point something that are licensed. That makes a total sum of 26,000 nurses. So we need to build up more and more all over the governorates, especially while focusing on the rural areas and the new areas where people were moved from the slum and unsafe areas to the new areas. Because if we are seeking really a holistic change of the people's lives, this includes also their behavior and their development. And this is why it was a decision from the president to establish a national committee that actually combines or gathers around 12 ministries working on the same issue: health, Ministry of Social Solidarity, education, housing, local development, and other organizations as well, to facilitate the issue of licensing in the country's orientation to get the informal sector to have it more formal. It's not only for the country, it's for the social protection of employees who are working in these nurseries, because they are not socially protected. So 56% of nurseries are private sector, and around 44 are government and NGOs. But even though of the government, they are run through NGOs. We only have 1% of the factories and the big companies and institutions who have employees, and this is a big issue because it does not only tackle the issue of child life and early childhood development, it also the women employment. So because women are not encouraged to go to work as long as they don't have a nursery close to their working space. We also have around, we tackle the issue of nurseries. The nursery for us is coming to be an ecosystem. It's not only that you're leaving a child for a certain period of time in order to do anything else, but it's an opportunity to have the health care, early detection of disability, early detection, and that's why now we're partnering with NGOs to do some sort of checkups in order to detect any sort of disability, personality disorder, communication problem. So it's health also for nutrition, because we just signed a protocol with the Food Bank NGO in order to assess if we feed the children at an early age in nurseries, what would be the impact on their self-development, cognitive health, and so on. So I think I agree. I mean, it's very good that we're doing both together, because JPAL is again working with us on the same issue. So we would have a more comprehensive vision of the different issues. It's not only subsidy and employment, but it's also nutrition. So I think while speaking about the school feeding program, I think the nursery feeding also is very well recognized. It is also an opportunity for children to get encouraged to pursue and continue their education. Those who frequent or who go to nurseries are more likely to continue their primary education and take the track of retention, school retention. But it is also a great opportunity for checking with the mothers, especially that they are young mothers. So we're getting into extra interventions of reproductive health care in order to control the growing increase in population increase, and that's why we're offering free checks and free family planning tools. In the meantime, it's an opportunity to do literacy classes for women, especially in rural and deprived areas where a big percentage of women are literate, and another form of her employment. And I think this is eventually we go for offering SMEs with great facilities, either through Nasser Social Bank, by offering loans in order to establish nurseries, or even through the Ministry of Social Solidarity and partner NGOs, in order to give women more opportunity to work, either to being self-employed through SMEs or to be wage employed in other sectors. I think we do believe in research, and I think evidence-based policies. We're lucky that now the government appreciates and recognizes numbers and statistics, and now we have results-based plans, results-based budgeting, so we're on the track. I mean, we have a long way to go, but at least the early detections of being aware of the problem and of the potential solutions and the methodology are there. So the issue of evidence-based policies and the readiness of the government to receive policy papers discussing the main issues while having the different scenarios and the costing scenarios is very important, and I think they're very keen to have not only the scenarios but the costing as well, in order to put this into action, to know how much would this cost. And I would urge for having cost and benefit analysis and lost opportunities. If we spend this would be saved. I mean, the investment issue is not only exclusive to private sector. On the contrary, now it's becoming more into human capital, and I very highly appreciate the thinking of the private sector in being keen on the profit, but eventually we have human profit. So I think following the evidence-based policies and having impact evaluation is great. Up till now, we are using the numbers and the statistics of the baseline evaluation that we did for Takaful and Karama. and we use it as a justification and as logic in order to ask for extra funding, in order to examine and actually demonstrate how much change the program is doing. So I think it is very important. It gives us logic, and this is what we're trying to convey to the media people. Use numbers right and use it to promote and advocate. I mean, because I think also a part of it is work on the culture, and on the main advocacy part is very important to convince people that early childhood development is very important, because I think eventually they will be convinced on family planning issue. If they see the difference and see the rights of what they do, they would really be convinced to have the long way to go. So I think adopting the behavior of having the professional behavior of having impact evaluation and baselines and numbers is very, I'm fond of this, and I'm a strong believer in research and on evidence, and on having research before development, and not getting out with our emotions, because I always say الحب وحده لا يكفي. It's not enough to have to be emotionally engaged, but actually to be also scientifically and economically engaged in order to have it right and to have it longer term, and not to have fast initiatives that go with the wind or coming down as a parachute and then khalas, it's done. So we're speaking about long-term development, and this is the challenge of it, is how do we convince that if the countries, I won't say Egypt only, are economically now stuck. So how do we invest more in human capital? Especially is that the RIPES comes afterwards in a longer term impact and not a short-term impact. So the issue is that to have the country convinced with the importance of these 5 years, and to get evidence, whether through statistics, pictures, stories, and any proof that would convince not only the government, but the private sector to invest in this, because I think there's a big opportunity for the private sector to be a big partner in this process, especially if we prove that the employability of women is worth having the private sector with us, and that the nurses that are extremely minimal and rare in the big companies and firms are very important for their economic benefit and for our moral and economic benefit as well. It's been a pleasure always to be with you, especially in the development issues that are very dear to my heart. And then I would love and pray and everything, not eat, love, pray only. So because I'm sitting close to Marina and very highly fit people, so love, pray only. So I think it's my passion, what I'm doing, whether a minister or a development person, or the mother or an Egyptian, but I'm with you all the way along, and it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. هسيب لك الحاجة زي ما هي. And many thanks to Abdurrahman. He's very modest to say so, but I think Abdurrahman is very passionate about impact evaluation, and he's been selling it, more than 10 years ago. I think I remember with his short and with his barbatos and selling the impact evaluation. So thank you, Abdurrahman, not only for your work in JPAL, but for what you're doing to Egypt. Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. كلمت معالي الوزيرة دكتور نيفين قباج. والحقيقة دلوقتي احنا سمعنا من مركز بحث مرموق، جهة تمويلية مصرية، من كمان من البنك الدولي، ومن وزارة الضمان الاجتماعي، والاشكال التكامل دي مع بعضهم، وكمان مع الموجودين دلوقتي معانا من كيانات تنموية ومن افراد وجهات تهتم بعمل التنموي. هو ده بالظبط اللي احنا بنأمل له عشان نقدر نماكسمايز الامباكت او نعظم الاثر بتاعنا. دكتور نيفين قالت نقط كتير قوي، يمكن ما اقدرش اغطي كل النقط، بس ركزت على جزئيه المالتي دايمنشن بافرتي او الفقر متعدد الابعاد. والحقيقه ده مهم قوي ان احنا نعرف ان قضيه زي قضيه رعايه الطفوله المبكره وكمان التحاق السيدات بسوق العمل هي قضايا معقده جدا، حلولها مش بسيطه بمدخل واحد، هي بتحتاج الحقيقه يبص لها from a multi-dimensional perspective او من اتجاه متعدد الابعاد عشان نقدر نكون فعلا بنعالج المشاكل دي بشكل جذري. دكتور نيفين كمان ركزت على الايفيدنس بيس بوليسي، وده الحلم اللي احنا بنحلمه كلنا الحقيقه. ده الطريق الامثل ان احنا نقدر نقاوم ونكافح الفقر، بالذات مع وجود موارد محدوده مش بس في مصر، في دول كتير زي ما حضرتك قلت يا دكتور نيفين. يمكن كمان قالت كلمه جميله، الحب وحده لا يكفي، ويمكن اللي يعرفوني عارفين انا بعشق كتاب اسمه It's more than good intentions، فهو بالظبط صناعه السياسات اكتر من نوايا حسنه، وده الحقيقه مهم جدا يكون جوه دماغنا كلنا. مش عايز اخد وقت كتير، بس عايز اكون بقدم ونتعرف اكتر على مشكله ونتعرف اكتر على ابعادها بان انا اقدم ماي كو اوثر دكتور كارين كرافت. دكتور كارين كرافت associate professor of economics at Santa Catherine University، وكمان she's invited researcher for the عبد اللطيف جميل Poverty Action Lab MENA office. Thank you, Dr. Karen. She will speak with us today about ECD global evidence on child care and the female labor force participation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today to discuss this important issue of early childhood development and female labor force participation. So, as we've already mentioned, there are a number of barriers to women's employment, but also a number of promising interventions to try to address these barriers. And really, it's both globally and in Egypt that women face this multitude of barriers. One is disproportionate care work, and therefore a high opportunity cost of their time if they choose to work outside the home. So, for example, in Egypt, the time spent in care work for women in Egypt is 12 times that of men. So they have a much higher level of care work compared to men. That makes it very challenging to work outside the home. They end up with a second shift of care work. There is also a challenge with weak labor demand and labor market frictions trying to find and match with a job. And this may be particularly a challenge for women in Egypt as they're struggling to find jobs through social networks, and the functioning of the labor market may be particularly a challenge for women in finding and matching with jobs. Social norms are also a potential barrier that limits women's employment. So this can be discrimination against women, this can be social norms about what kind of jobs are acceptable. So there are these number of barriers to employment. But the good news is there are a variety of interventions that can try to address these barriers and increase female labor force participation, including some of the ones we'll be talking about today, early childhood care and education, which can also improve development outcomes for children. So it can be a win-win for women and children, and also employment services. So we're going to be talking about in the next session some evidence on these from Egypt, but in this session, I'm going to talk about the global evidence on increasing the use of early childhood care and education, ECCE services, the impacts of such services, early childhood care and education, on women's employment and children's development, and the impacts of employment services on women's employment, to contextualize then what we'll see for the evaluation so far in Egypt. So to start with, when we think about encouraging early childhood care and education, this is really a complex concept of access. We often think of, okay, you need to make sure there's access to nurseries, but what does that really mean? And this is an important part of understanding why maybe people aren't investing enough in early childhood care and education, is that there are a variety of barriers to access. It's a multidimensional concept. Even when one dimension of access is met, other dimensions not being met may constrain use of early childhood care and education services. So to start with, there's physical access. Is there a nursery that exists in my neighborhood? Do I know it? Do I have information that that nursery exists? Is it far away or nearby? Are there spots available, or is it fully subscribed and there's only a waiting list, right? So there's that physical access. Then there's affordability. What's the cost level of the nursery? Is there a scholarship or subsidy that can help me pay for the nursery? Are there additional fees? Do I have to pay for lunch? Are there additional costs? Do I have to pay for transport to get to the nursery? So those are some affordability issues that can act as barriers. There's also the access in terms of quality. Parents really are looking for nurseries that support multidimensional development to really have those payoffs. And particularly, it's important that they perceive that the nursery is high quality, that they don't have concerns about the quality there. And then there are also logistics, like hours of operation. Does it match with work schedules? That's another important aspect of access. And then transportation logistics are also very important. So this is a very multidimensional concept to think about access and the importance of making sure all these dimensions are met for parents to be able to use early childhood care and education. Now, looking specifically at one intervention to address access and increase early childhood care and education enrollments, we're going to be talking about childcare subsidies and vouchers. So subsidizing, helping pay for the cost of early childhood care and education, and it's often in the form of a subsidy or a voucher that says you're entitled to this much off. It's like a coupon. This tends globally to really substantially increase early childhood care and education enrollments. So the vast majority of evidence, mostly from high-income contexts, generally shows positive effects, really good large effects of these type of programs on attending early childhood care and education. And this is also true in low and middle income countries. There isn't as much evidence, although we're adding to that evidence base, but that shows large effects as well. So for example, an experiment in poor informal areas of Nairobi, Kenya, offered women vouchers covering all care for their children aged 1 to 3 for 12 months. And that led to a 25 percentage point increase in early childhood care and education use. So 58% of the control group who didn't get the voucher sent their kids to care, but then 25 percentage points more who got the voucher. Likewise, an experiment in rural Mozambique built and subsidized center-based care. And this was an area that had near zero enrollments in early childhood care and education beforehand, but it increased early childhood care and education enrollments from near zero to 25%. Now, there's also evidence on pre-primary that shows similar effects of increasing ECC enrollments when you expand access. So when experiments have offered access to pre-primary, children were on average 1.4 standard deviations more likely to participate in pre-primary. And this is a really big effect. In education, we're often excited if there's like a 0.1 standard deviation effect. That's a good impact. This is a huge impact. So this is according to a recent meta-analysis of pre-primary, so age 3 to 6 programs, educational programs, based on 55 studies across 19 countries that we saw these large impacts when we increase access to early childhood education. So for example, in India, there was a program that randomized a scholarship. The scholarship offered 80% off pre-primary costs for 2 years, and it was to a high-quality early childhood care and education program, and it increased enrollment by 47 percentage points in the program preschools. Likewise, in Bulgaria, a free kindergarten program, which included fees and other costs, plus small and large conditional financial incentives, so they varied the financial incentive, both the small and large incentives. They had kindergarten registration increasing by 18 to 41 percentage points, and then preschool as well, increasing by 6 to 18 percentage points. And there were large effects of the financial incentive. So not only making things free, but giving people a little financial incentive to send their kids had a big impact. The information piece of this experiment, though, had no additional impact, which suggests that there were more financial barriers rather than informational ones. Now, one place where we don't know as much is how much quality matters. How much quality matters to increasing early childhood care and education enrollments. There's very limited rigorous evidence on quality and demand for early childhood care and education. So the recent meta-analysis of pre-primary programs couldn't actually estimate the impact of quality improvements on pre-primary participation, because despite there being 55 studies across 19 countries, not enough actually looked at quality and enrollments at that relationship. There's a little bit of evidence in terms of from the US, an audit study which randomized some of the information about programs showed parents were very sensitive to the costs of programs, but also had strong preferences for quality. So the authors concluded that low quality of care may be due to affordability. If someone picks a low-quality program, it may be all that they can afford, and that there are also information barriers to high-quality care. People need more information to be able to identify high-quality care. Now, interestingly, in contrast, in Kenya, a study that cross-randomized, so randomized both quality improvements, which were training and materials, with randomizing also vouchers, didn't find a differential effect of quality on early childhood care and education enrollment, which was more than 80% after the subsidies, so it also had become quite high. In this case, it looked like that cost was the particular barrier, although mothers repeatedly, nonetheless, emphasized the importance of safety, health, and education and training in terms of quality. So parents cared about quality, but cost was sort of the first order driver of barriers. And another issue here was parents might not have been able to perceive the improvements in quality. So that's what we know on early childhood care and education and how to increase it, but what are the effects then on women's employment? So the global evidence tells us definitely ECCE can increase women's employment, but the details of the policies and programs are also crucial for thinking about how large effects are. So in high-income countries, childcare subsidies increase the employment of particularly low-income mothers by 12 to 33 percentage points, so large increases. Public provision of pre-primary has mixed results, so the impacts are more from programs like nurseries than from pre-primary. Some studies on pre-primary find no or little effects, or only effects for certain subgroups, such as single mothers, but most do find positive effects on female labor force participation. From low and middle income country contexts, there's primarily evidence only from Latin America and Asia, although we're working to change this. And the evidence shows, again, mostly positive, but sometimes no impacts of pre-primary on female labor force participation, depending a bit on the country context. There's only one study that finds a negative effect of pre-primary expansion on female labor force participation, and this is actually from Algeria, where the pre-primary expansion was only for half-day school with a long lunch break in the middle. So the schedule may have made women's employment actually more difficult rather than helping. So that's where policy design, the details, is the day long enough really matter. Now, looking specifically at evidence on early childhood care and education subsidies, or vouchers, and women's employment, that experiment I mentioned earlier, looking in Nairobi, Kenya, in informal areas, offering vouchers. When mothers were randomly offered the voucher, the ones who were randomly receiving the vouchers were 8.5 percentage points more likely to be employed. So they had a 57% employment rate versus more like 49% for the control group. So there's a pretty big increase just from the offer of the voucher, and more so among married women. And the mothers who used the voucher, who weren't just offered the voucher but used it and went to the childcare programs, were 30.5 percentage points more likely to be employed. So that's a pretty large effect. Likewise, the experiment in rural Mozambique that built and subsidized center-based care led to caregivers reporting 6.2 percentage points higher, so 26% higher relative to the level they had before, higher employment. Splitting by mothers and fathers, the differences weren't statistically significant, but the size of the effects for the mothers was larger, 37%, than the fathers, which was only 16%. Likewise, a study in Mexico that compared the employment of mothers on the wait list to those who had subsidized childcare showed subsidized childcare increased employment 18%. So there's a lot of important evidence showing the potential of these subsidies and vouchers to increase women's employment. Now, an important thing to keep in mind, though, is the adequacy and access to ECCE services is multidimensional. And so thinking about things like schedules and details of the programs matters. There's particularly a lot of evidence on the length of the day, and that full day versus part-day kindergarten can increase female labor force participation. So in Canada, it didn't lead to higher employment rates, but increased hours worked, for example. And longer days of school in Chile did increase female labor force participation. In Chile, a nationwide reform increased the length of the school day by 35% and had positive effects on female labor force participation, particularly for parents with the youngest children. So it was particularly important for that group. After school care, right, if the school day is over, but there's still some of the working day left, that can also increase female labor force participation. So again, in Chile, an experiment providing free after-school care for children ages 6 to 13 increased women's labor force participation and employment, as well as increasing the use of daycare for children who weren't school age. And ultimately, really this underscores how women need childcare for all their children for the full day in order to work. Now, what about the effects of early childhood care and education on early childhood development? We've already been talking about how important it is to invest in early childhood development. And we know in particular the importance of the brain development. Her Excellency was talking about this, the importance of brain development in those first few years. Cognitive, socio-emotional skills, schooling, labor market earnings down the line, mental health, you can reduce crime, all of these things can be impacted by that early development. So early childhood is a brief but powerful window to disrupt the intergenerational transmission of poverty, and early childhood services are a very important part of that. Early childhood care and education, in particular, can have actually a variety of impacts on early childhood development. It really depends on the quality of services. So there are very diverse impacts in the global literature, particularly the quality relative to alternatives. Are you switching from lower quality care to higher quality care, or compared to maternal care of the family? What's the difference? So there can be positive impacts. In India, scholarships to high quality pre-primary led to large positive effects on cognitive development, basically doubled learning, which is a huge effect, but there weren't any effects on socio-emotional development. In other contexts, for example in Cambodia, there was an experiment that evaluated 3 types of early childhood care and education. Preschools that were built in primary schools, community-based preschools, and home-based care. And this study actually found no to negative impacts, possibly due to weak demand as well as low program quality. So this is where program quality matters. You don't get the payoff unless your programs are high quality. And if they're really low quality, you can even have negative impacts. In Bulgaria, a program targeting marginalized children led to increased kindergarten participation, but actually negative effects on literacy and numeracy, because children ended up having less parental engagement at home, and the program wasn't high quality enough to make up for that. So it's very important to keep in mind that when you expand ECCE, the quality is so critical to have those good early childhood development impacts. So the last piece I'm going to talk about here is in terms of employment services. Employment services really have a mixed evidence base globally in terms of their impact. And employment services, so these are job matching services, trying to help people find and match with jobs, they're a type of active labor market policy. So there was a recent meta-analysis looking at 200 active labor market policies, including 129 job search assistance programs. And this showed average impacts pretty close to 0, a 1 to 2 percentage point increase in employment in the short, medium, and long term. Half of the programs showed, though, statistically significant effects, but small ones. And in particular, job search assistance appears to benefit disadvantaged workers more and have larger effects for women. So it may be particularly effective for women. The meta-analysis, though, that was global, was looking at both high-income and low- and middle-income context. A meta-analysis focused on low- and middle-income countries included 9 search and matching experiments. They were low cost, but only one of the 9 found significant impacts on women's employment, a 2.4 percentage point increase in employment over 3 years. And there were very few matches that led to hiring, and when job seekers were offered jobs, they often turned them down. So I'll end with a little bit of evidence on employment services impacts in MENA before trying to summarize across all these different topics. There are a couple evaluations of employment services in the Middle East and North Africa. So a youth job matching program in Jordan made over 1,000 matches based on education and psychometric assessments, really trying to match people with jobs that would be a good fit. Youth rejected an interview in 28% of cases where an interview was offered, and youth rejected the job or quickly quit 83% of the time a job was offered. So the result was, out of 1,000 matches, only 9 jobs that lasted at least a month. And other research in Jordan has underscored reservation working conditions tied to social norms. Likewise, a soft skills experiment in Jordan, specifically targeting young women, did not lead to increases in employment. An experiment in Egypt offered training and employment support and led to increases in wage employment. So that's promising, particularly for women. So overall, increases in wage employment went from 35% for the control group to 47% for the treatment group in Greater Cairo. But the intervention wasn't exactly scalable. The job matching offered formal jobs directly to youth. It offered the job, here you go. An additional treatment in Upper Egypt focused on self-employment, providing training and capital, and had larger employment impacts. So 15% employment rate for the control group, 59% for the treatment, so a large impact, and even larger impacts for women from both interventions. So to try to summarize the key insights across these different diverse topics, access to early childhood care and education matters. The provision of pre-primary vouchers usually increases use of early childhood care and education services. There's less evidence, though, on quality and demand for early childhood care and education. Additionally, expanding early childhood care and education access usually increases female labor force participation, but policy design, and especially meeting mothers' and parents' needs, really matters. The impact of early childhood care and education on early childhood development is mixed, and this again really depends on the quality of early childhood care and education services compared to alternatives. And likewise, employment services impact tends to be mixed, globally and for MENA as well, and this highlights issues in terms of providing matches that meet people's aspirations and expectations, but there is potentially for such services to specifically help women, and we'll be seeing some of the evidence for that next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I'm actually keep wondering every time I hear you, like how many hours you sleep every day, given how much work you do. But really enjoy every presentation you do. Thank you so much for this presentation. So I'm coming now with the researcher hat, so I'll change it a little bit. أيوة. كده مثلا. Perfect. So I'll speak more about our impact evaluation. So our impact evaluation called Child Care Subsidies, Employment Services, and Women's Labor Market Outcomes in Egypt. And basically today we'll be sharing the first midline results. I'll be sharing this with Professor Pronoknipo, Professor of Economics, INSEA, and Scientific Director of JPAL MENA. So the principal investigator for the study are Professor Pronoknipo, Professor Stefano Caria, Professor Karen Kraft, and myself. And our JPAL team here includes Halal Bahiri and Islam Siraj, who did a lot of work. Thank you so much, guys, for your efforts. Very quickly, let me start with a partnership. Actually, this whole study started by a partnership between JPAL MENA Affiliate Professor, the World Bank, and under support from the MENA Gender Innovation Lab. And actually, the aim of it is evaluating the impact of access to nurseries on females' labor force participation using randomized controlled trials, which I'm a big fan of, as you heard from the minister. So the evaluation is in collaboration for sure with the Ministry of Social Solidarity. Let me start a little bit with giving a few information about the context here. So the MENA region has the lowest rates of female labor force participation in the world. This is very unfortunate. With a variety of constraints limiting women engagement in the labor force. So despite rising educational attainment, female labor force participation declined in Egypt from 27% in 2006 to 21% by 2018. You can imagine there are three key barriers to women participation in labor force, three key barriers for women participation in Egypt labor market. So the first one is high opportunity cost of time, and it's basically determined by care responsibility. And some of you might read this report by UNDP that states that women are responsible for 90% of unpaid jobs within household. There's also a lot of pressure on women here that does not allow her or give her the time to work or to join the labor force. Second reason is limited access to employment. And third is restrictive gender norms. As we hear today, only 8% of children aged 0 to 4 are enrolled in licensed nurseries. It's worth noting that ECCE, affordability is a substantial issue in Egypt. Private nursery cost on average 323 Egyptian pound per child per month. And NGOs nurseries cost 189 Egyptian pound per child per month. With a fertility rate of 3.1 births per woman, and on average women earning is 1,000 pound per month, so sending her children to an urban nursery care have a net wage, this will lead to have a net wage of -1 Egyptian pound. And if she used an NGO nursery, this means that 59% of her wage would go for the child care. And this is for only the cost of sending children for nurseries. You can imagine there are extra costs as well, similar to like providing meals for your child. And I remember in the early days of designing this impact evaluation, we conducted several impact focus groups. And I remember a group of women who were saying, it is not only the cost of the nursery, we spend around 5 Egyptian pounds per day per child just for giving them a meal. So you can imagine this is a very high cost for poor families. So while child costs are considered a key constraint on female employment in developing countries, experimental evidence on the impact of alleviating this constraint is not significant here. Okay. So let's think about access to employment. To access to jobs is a second important constraint. And social norms can limit women's mobility. As a result of limiting women's mobility, women have little exposure to the labor market, and they have limited knowledge of existing job opportunities. Frictions in labor market are strong in general, but they are even stronger for women because of this limited exposure to the labor market, which is because of the limited mobility. Right? So what can be done to increase female labor force participation in the face of these challenges? We can explore here two main questions. Number one is, can child care subsidies alleviate care responsibilities and reduce the opportunity cost of women working? Second, can employment services help women find and match with jobs? To do this and to answer these questions, we cross-randomized two interventions targeting mothers and younger children from 1 to 5, aged from 1 to 5, in low-income areas in Greater Cairo. So child care subsidies and employment services to study their direct impacts on mothers' labor market outcomes and the children's development. What about the literature here? So our experiment here is actually builds on global literature demonstrating that access to ECCE is important for women's labor force participation, which we hear several times today. Second, child care subsidies have been studied among low and middle income countries in Kenya and Mozambique and shown to increase women's employment. In addition, a sizable global literature on active labor market policies, including employment services, job matching interventions that work to overcome frictions in the labor market. But the result here is quite mixing, so we are not sure about it. So what about the randomization? How we did this? We have two main interventions. So the first one is mothers randomly assigned to this, which is child care subsidies. And here, we randomly assign mothers to receive one of two types of subsidies. The first one is a subsidy of 25%. The second one is 75% subsidies. To explain more, if the cost for sending your child for a nursery is 100 Egyptian pound per month, and you receive the 25% subsidies, it means that for 1 year, the mother will pay 75 Egyptian pound. If you received the 75% subsidies, the mother will pay 25 Egyptian pound for 1 year. For employment services, mothers randomly assigned to this intervention, they are offered assistance through a recruitment platform, which is quite famous here in Egypt, called Forasna, which basically help mothers to find suitable jobs to their skills and their interests as well. So women are matched to vacancies based on their job criteria, offering up to 6 matches. Right. For sample, we identified former nurses registered with Ngos in low-income neighborhood in Greater Cairo. We offered these nurseries the opportunity to participate in our voucher experiment. Then, the nurseries that agreed to participate were then surveyed to collect capacity data for our child care voucher experiment. Okay. So we have 3 eligibility criteria here to join or to be part of our sample. The first one is the household with women who have at least 1 child between the age of 1 to 5 years old. Second, living in the catchment area of the nurseries included in the experiment. Third, who are not yet a client of a nursery. So, for example, if we knock the door and we found a mother and her child is already enrolled in a nursery, she will not be part of our sample. We are looking only for mothers who are not yet sending their kids to nursery. So how we identify and recruit these mothers? We start the catchment area. We identify it by 2 kilometers around each participating nursery. We used Facebook population projection to identify the GPS location, where children aged from 0 to 4 in 2020 lived, and the number of such children These children were 1 to 5 in 2021 when we were collecting the baseline data. We then draw a sampled points location with GPS coordinates in each catchment area in the random order, probability and proportional to child population. Then we visited the nearest residential building to each selected point and start registering a household per building if eligible. We continued to register household in the catchment area until we reached our target. And here is kind of an outline for the entire sample design, or the RCT design here. So we have 5,000 mothers of younger children aged from 0 to 5 years old. Then they are randomly assigned in two main groups. So 25%, which means 1,250 assigned to the control group. This is pure control group. So they receive nothing here. And then 75% of the sample, 3,750 mothers, assigned to the treatment group. This is the first randomization. Then again, the 75%, the 3,750 mothers, randomly into three main groups. One is to receive subsidies only. Second is to receive employment services only. Third is to receive post-intervention subsidies plus job matching or employment services. And again, we random the first group here with subsidies, right, 25%, to receive 25% discount on child care fees for 1 year, which means 625 mothers received a discount of 25% for 1 year, and 625 mothers randomly received 75% discount on their child care fees. And again, the last group, which is the assigned randomly to receive both three interventions, we random them into two different groups. So 25 receive this. The first group is receive 25% discount plus employment services, which, as we mentioned, receive 6 job matching through Forasna, and 75%, or 75% receive, the other group received 75% discount plus employment services, and the post groups here are equal, so each of them has 625 mothers. So now I will leave the rest for Professor Procnipo to speak about the data and the results. Thank you so much.
How are you doing?
You like this one? That's right.
No, I don't know. You use this one? With the arrow?
Yeah, the arrow here.
Okay. And or this one?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you very much, Abderrahman. So I now present you the first results that we have from our data and their analysis. So what are the data that we have? So we have collected a large number of data which are extremely useful to first document the participation of women in the labor market. So we first have a baseline survey. So for this baseline survey, we have data on the mother. So we ask a question about employment, reservation wage, actual earning, total household earnings, job quality, psychological well-being, time use, and the child's development. But we also have data on the husband. So we do two separate surveys, one with the mothers, with all the first variables that I described before, but also another separated survey in which we collect data on husbands. So this is the baseline survey. So those are data that we collect before launching the interventions. Then we have the first midline survey, that is several times after we have offered the intervention to the household. We run the short phone interviews to collect information about the situation of a participant in the experiment. Something which is very important for us at this stage are the take-up data. So what are the take-up data? They are the data that describes whether the services that were offered to the participant in the experiment were taken by them. So we will report first on the baseline, what we learned from the baseline data, then from the take-up. So did the household take our services, and some preliminary information from the first midline. So what are the hypotheses that we have? The hypotheses that we have are that both the childcare subsidies and employment services and their combination would increase the mother's work activity and additional employment gain. So mothers, the implied assumptions are that mothers cannot take a job as they are in charge of the children. And mothers cannot take jobs because they do not know how to search for jobs, because they have limited mobility and limited exposure to labor market opportunities. So our assumption is that by offering the different services that we offer, we will remove one or two of those barriers, and that this will lead then to an increased participation of women in the labor market. So what are our hypotheses and mechanisms? So the hypotheses and mechanisms behind our intervention are that both childcare subsidies and employment services are in demand from the household. There is an unmet demand for those services, so we expect that mothers will respond positively to subsidies and job search assistant offers, and that this will lead mothers to change their reservation job quality and reservation wage, and then this will lead mothers to increase their job search effort, and finally, this will change job quality and net labor income in the household. So there is this full set of assumptions that represent our theory of change associated with this intervention. So now I turn to the sample characteristic at baseline before sharing some preliminary findings. So the first thing is to do some things that we could call sanity checks. So we have, as explained by Abderrahman, we have targeted the participant in our experiment so that we have households for which there are child in the age of going to childcare. And as you can see in this graph, which presents you the share of household with children of age 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. As you see, the share of household with children between 1 and 5 is far larger than the other. We see that there is something that our targeting was effective in reaching household with child of the age 1 to 5. So the second sanity check is to see, to examine who is in charge of the children, and so we ask who is the primary caregiver of children, and as you can see in this graph, the mother in the household is the primary caregiver. So another important aspect is that we consider that household cannot afford themselves to participate in nursery. So you have here the distribution of income in our monthly income in our sample. You also see the poverty line for a household of 4. And as you can see, most of our sample is below this poverty line. So our experiment targeted households who were poor and for whom paying for a nursery fees would be an issue. You have in this graph also another important aspect. So just look at the total. So in the first panel, you see labor force participation, as you can see. So you have in the black labor force participation of women, and in gray labor force participation of men. And as you can see, 30% of the women in our sample only participate in labor force participation. And when we turn in the right panel to employment rate, we see that only 11% of the women have a job. So we have a low participation rate of women and a low employment rate. So all those figures shows you that the experiment targeted the right population for whom the intervention makes sense, and the theory of change also that I described before also make change. So now I turn to the preliminary finding of our experiment. So we discuss here the preliminary findings. So of the evaluation. So this is from the baseline data collection with this is just preliminary finding, because as you have seen, our experiment is supposed to enroll 5,000 households. So for the moment, the results that I present you are only based on a part of this full sample. That is only 3,597 interviews at baseline and 1,348 phone interviews conducted with their spouse. So it's usually more complicated to reach husband over the phone. And we have the first midline survey, for which we have 2,240 households which were reached. So it's just part of the sample. We will have results with the full sample in some times, but not yet. So this is one of the most important results that we have so far, and which might be seen as a bit disappointing, because as you can see on this graph, you have on the left panel the take-up of nursery vouchers. So you first have the take-up of nursery vouchers when the household receive 25% discount. Then you have the take-up of nurseries when household receive 75% discount. And then the take-up of nursery when household are just offer employment services. And then when the take-up of nurseries, when you have the combination of the two interventions, that is 25% discount and employment services, and 75% discount and employment services. But what you can see is that in all those cases, actually, the take-up of nursery vouchers is quite small. That is 1.4% of the household were offered a 25% discount actually took up this voucher, and 4.2 when they were offered a 75% discount. So this is far below than what we expected. We expected a huge increase in participation in services, because our theory of change was based on the fact that there is a desire of a household to participate, to take those services, and it's only the fact that they are costly that prevented them from taking those services. What you can see here is that this is not what happened, because only a few percent of the household took up our services. we have results which are a bit more positive, but still rather disappointing regarding the take-up of employment services. What you have then is the share of people who created a Forastna profile. So the job search intervention is the following. Household gave their phone number, and then Forastna call each of the person, the household that they had, for whom they had the phone number, and then if they, upon their agreement, they open a profile, which was the first step to being exposed to job opportunities from the part of the household. And then you are exposed to job offers, because the Forastna send you job offers up to 6, and you might apply to some of those job offers. As you can see here, only 25 to 30% of the household who were offered employment services offered opened a Forastna, created a Forastna profile, and around half of them applied to a job. So this is again far below our expectation. We had in mind that the friction in the labor market were so large that people didn't look for a job, but they were really, in their mind at least, searching for a job, and they were just waiting to opportunities to be exposed to to job offers. But this is not the picture of what we see. This is less disappointing than from the childcare subsidy voucher, but still it is low. Okay, so we wanted to examine why we obtained this type of result, and so we first examined the main reason why household did not use the voucher. So we have this is the response from our first midline. So the most common reason that were given by the household that they are far away from home, or that they do not have the coupon, or some answers related to the fact that it's not the child is too young, or he would catch disease. So several answers like that. Something which is important is that you can see at the bottom that actually for very few households, husband refused, and that they are far away from the mother's workplace. So this allows us to eliminate some of the potential explanation for why household didn't take the services. Here you have another graph related to the other intervention, which is the main reason why not using employment services. And here, as you can see, something which is very important is that among women who did not take up the employment services, most of them say that their husband refused, or that they do not want to work, or that the location is too far, or that the job offers that were offered to them didn't match their preferences. Those are the most important, and they are very interesting to examine carefully. So another aspect of what we have done is to use our midline survey to ask women about their reservation job, their reservation wage, and their job search behavior. And what we expected is that because the environment in which a household takes their decision, their reservation wage would be different, and their search effort would also be different. Actually, the result that we obtain is that those parameters of the job search of strategy of the household, of the mothers, were not changed at all. So the reservation wage were quite the same, and the search effort was also quite the same. So those are the preliminary findings that we have. So what are we trying to do now? So first we want to explore whether a stronger intervention regarding nursery would be more powerful. So we have seen that most of the households in our experiment were quite poor. So maybe 75% of voucher is still of a fee is still it's not enough. And so we want to explore whether turning to a 100% discount will lead household to take up our nursery services. And we explore also additional reasons for which household would not want to take up our services. For example, we will add also nursery visit, offer parents to visit the nursery so that they can check the quality of the services, and maybe also to offer a small transfer of 100 Egyptian pounds either to the mother or to the father in case they decide to send their children to the nursery. So we try to strengthen this take-up. We will also simultaneously intensify our participation with Forasna in order to explore ways to strengthen the exposition of women to the labor market. So we will first check that the job offers that were proposed to the women match their search criteria, and also intensify the intervention from Forasna side. So what are the conclusion and the recommendation? So we are still working on checking our findings, and those results are preliminary. And we are exploring, as I just explained, stronger versions of the treatment. Nevertheless, the broad picture of our results seems to be the following. So we started with strong beliefs that those two interventions, either alone or together, were powerful ways to increase female labor force participation. And our main finding is that this is probably far less the case than we expected. And to some extent, this is an invaluable finding, because it leads us to revise our initial beliefs that addressing those two barriers are enough. And I think that there is a lot to learn in this negative, even if it is a bit disappointing. We all expected that we would see a large participation in the labor force of the mothers in our sample, but we see that actually this is not the only, those two answers are not enough to obtain this result. And if we turn back to our baseline sample, actually what we see is that when we ask a question to households about gender norms, we see that gender norms substantially constrain women employment. So what you have here are the answers from the woman or the husband about views regarding women participating in the labor market. While everybody agrees that women can work from home, it's not the case as strongly when it comes to work outside home or when it works in a male-dominated environment. So we see that a gender norm is substantially constrained labor women's employment. And again, if we also examine attitudes regarding childcare, what we see is that there is actually a tension between the role of women as mother, how they perceive this role as a mother, and also as participating in the labor market. There is a tension from their point of view, but there is also a tension from the point of view of their husband. What to do next? Recognizing, redistributing, and reducing care work is a critical part of a changing norm. Shifting gender norm is fundamental to redressing gender inequality. The education system can provide an important long-term opportunity for shifting norms across generation. So, relieving one or two constraints may be insufficient to allow women to work. We expected that the first two barriers that we were addressing were enough, because actually they are the easiest to address, but it seems that it is not enough, and that we need to consider intervention, mixing several types of intervention, and also including way to address the problem of the issue of gender norms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Prono, for your valuable presentation. Now we will start the Q&As. So Ms. Nahla Zaytoun from the World Bank will be moderating the Q&As. Thank you so much for your effort here. Professor Prono, Dr. Caroline, if you don't mind.
Any كده؟ Okay. Okay. So we're running a little bit late, but we are very eager to hear your reactions and questions to the panel. So I agreed with Abdurrahman that we will try to have a Q&A session for 20 to 30 minutes, and then we break at 12 o'clock instead of 11:30. So this means that the next session will start 12:30 instead of 12. So we're half an hour late. So thank you so much, Abdurrahman, Caroline, and Bruno. I think you gave us a lot to think about. It is a bit disappointing, the findings, like Bruno said, but this is exactly why we're eager to learn from the evidence that apparently there's other multifaceted issues playing out, like gender and social norms. And we always say gender and social norms are the big elephant in the room, because many times we assume that some policies would work, but then you realize that the attitudes and culture and perceptions sometimes stand in the way. So thank you so much for sharing with us these insights, and let us please open the floor for questions to any of the speakers. So please. Can you please introduce yourself before asking the question?
Okay, my name is Sahar Mashhour. I have some experience in early childhood development, and thank you so much for the lovely presentation about the effect of subsidized coupons or vouchers in enrolling more children in nurseries. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether I got some of the info right or wrong, because there is some echo in the room. So excuse me if I didn't get some of the points that you have presented in the presentation right. I have several questions. What is the geographical, so I'll just cite the questions together and then leave the floor for the answer. First of all, what is the geographical coverage of the study, the JPEL study, the 5,000 households? Does it cover rural and urban areas in Egypt? Does it cover all geographical locations? Because nursery enrollment significantly changes, the pattern changes, whether we're speaking about urban or rural, Delta or Upper Egypt. So this is the first question. The second question, when you mentioned, Dr. Crépon, right? You mentioned that it was a little bit disappointing that when you offered the subsidized vouchers or coupons, the parents did not, or their will to send their children to nurseries did not increase that much, if I heard correct. So my question is, did you have any questions about the level of awareness, how much the parents are aware of the importance of sending their children to nurseries? Or, to rephrase this question, is it only the economic part, offering subsidized coupons or vouchers to incite the parents to send their children to nurseries? Did you have any question related to how much awareness do the parents have? Because I believe that awareness precedes maybe the economic factor. So how much are they aware of the importance to send their children to nurseries? So this is the second question. The third question, you mentioned how much the willingness or the employment rate increased, the mothers. And you mentioned that it wasn't that high, it wasn't that much. Are we speaking about employment, meaning that the mother has to go out of the home, of the house to work, or we are speaking about or including income generating activities that the mother can do at home? So this is also, we are improving her economic or the household economic condition, not only by looking at how many mothers went out to find jobs or to get jobs or to have jobs, but also adding to that, did they have more income generating activities, things that they can do or activities that they can do to generate more income to the family while staying at home? So I'm sorry for these very three long questions, but
okay.
I hope we have some clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sahar. Do you want to take these three questions, because they were three, and then maybe we can take another round of questions regarding the geographical area, the level of awareness, and income generation?
So thank you very much for your question. So the first question is about the geographical coverage of the study. So we are only working with this study in Greater Cairo, in poor areas of Greater Cairo. Then, now thanks a lot for your two additional questions regarding whether or not household and mother were aware of how important it is for them to send their kids. Actually, we didn't do that. We just proposed the intervention just consisted in proposing mothers to access the nursery at a low rate with this 25 or 75 subsidy. We didn't talk at all about awareness. This is something which is probably very important, the quality of the services. This is something that we want also to address a bit in our intervention. in our additional interventions that we propose now, because we offer some of the household to visit the nursery so that they can check the quality of the care which is given to their children. But it is not an intervention which is fully devoted to explaining households that it's good for them to send their kid to the nursery. And then, for the last question, our intervention was really related to employment services. So we wanted to expose women to vacancies, existing vacancies and opportunities. So that this is employment as wage employment. So it's true that we will be able to examine also when we will run our midline survey, we have not yet looked at that, what is the occupation of women, including income generating activities. So it is in Greater Cairo, so maybe it's less relevant that in urban, that in rural areas, but still we will explore this aspect. There is little hope, however, on this side, because the prerequisite would be that women take up the nursery services, and we have not seen much there. So, but thanks for your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Aziza Helmi. I'm former senior advisor to the Minister of Family and Population, Minister Mushira Khattab. And I'd like to say that, you know, I've been involved in the issues of early childhood for a while, and mine actually are not questions more than comments, so allow me to make a few comments. First, I would like to, you know, kind of confirm or agree with what Her Ministry, Her Excellency, the Ambassador said about, sorry, not the Ambassador, I mean the Minister said about that the development of the mind, you know, happens, you know, about 80% by the age of 3. I would like to add to this, and you probably know that the first 6 years are formative years in the age of, or in the life of a person, to the extent that 40% of what one learns all one's life, including the ability to talk and walk and whatever, happens in the first 6 years. So this is how important this stage is. However, unfortunately, in Egypt as well as in the Arab countries, not much recognition is given to this period of the life of a human being, and people think that, you know, children are creatures that just grow until they go to school, and that's when they start their education. And an evidence of that is that here in Egypt we call them ayal, and in Kuwait they call them gohal. Gohal meaning the ignorant. You know, this is how they refer to these children. So there is less recognition, or, you know, there is need for more recognition of how important those formative years are. I would like to add 2 other points here. One is I would like to emphasize the gender consideration in this issue, because unfortunately there's male preference that is dominant, you know, at this early stage, and, you know, all through, to the extent, and you might be shocked to hear this, some, you know, in the villages and what have you, the women breastfeed the boys more than the girls for fear that they might die and then they would have a problem, you know, with their husbands and whatever it is. So there is more focus on the boys and availing opportunities for them than for the girls. So that also affects the enrollment. The last point I want to mention is that on the incentives or the considerations that can help enhance enrollment in nursery schools is the food subsidy. In our experience, you know, I worked for USAID and for the Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development and other entities. if we had, dealings with the World Food Program, and they provided food for the families in terms of rice and wheat and whatever, and that was quite an incentive for the families to send their kids to school. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aziza, for these reflections, and I will have the panel react to your 3 points, the awareness, the gender considerations, and the food nutrition. Let us take 2 more questions, and then I'll turn it back to the panel. We can go to Ms. Niveen Osman.
Thank you very much. It was really a very interesting presentation. I think that we need to...
Can you introduce yourself?
Niveen Osman, newly appointed as advisor to the Minister of Social Solidarity for Early Childhood. The presentation is very interesting and the study need to be analyzed. There are a lot of outcomes to come out of it. I have some preliminary comments or a question. I've read that one of the reasons that the nursery was far from the household. So you put it that it's in your criteria 2 kilometers. In the philosophy of the community schools, usually we put it to keep it at 1.5. This is first. Second, we are talking about nurses. So we are targeting the age group 0 to 4, from birth to 4 years old. And when you collect the data and we started the implementation of the impact assessment, you included children up to 5 years. And I found in the remarks that it was mentioned that one of the reasons was that the children went to school. So this is that's why we need to read more about the results to be able to analyze it. What Sahar Manshur mentioned just now, and Sahar also was previously an advisor to the Minister for Early Childhood, that the entrepreneurship education and the income generating activities, or how to introduce it for the female household in order to do it. This is another culture that need to be introduced. Maybe this would be one of the outcomes when we read more about the results of the impact assessment. And this is an area also where the World Bank is supporting the ministry in its implementation through Forza. So this might encourage more the ministry to highlight or to stress on the importance of expanding with Forza. I think this is all for the time being. Maybe I'll remember more during my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. Let us take another question. I think somebody next to Dr. Aziza, you had your hand up earlier, yes?
Hello, my name is Dr. Nagla Arafa. I'm with UNICEF, the Health and Nutrition Section and ECD. Nagla Arafa from UNICEF. Thank you first of all for the presentation. I'm really very enthusiastic about this generation of evidence using RCTs. I just wanted to ask, maybe I missed a few points. What is the criteria for including nurseries? Did you have a specific set of criteria beyond the distance from the home, or did you actually look at the quality of the nurseries and the quality of services offered? The second point I wanted to ask, did you ask whether the mothers were actively seeking employment, or were they just all the mothers who had the children involved? And just what's the educational level of mothers? Because if they are from lower income areas, maybe their education level is not, will not allow them to actually, seek employment. The third point is I'm not aware of the Forestner platform. Is it an e-platform? If it's is it an electronic platform, online platform, or is it something face-to-face? Because also our experience is that women from these areas, they don't actually have access to mobile phones, and if they do, they don't have access to the internet. And if they have access, they're just not familiar. And unfortunately, gender norms are also that they are, especially for younger women, they are not encouraged to go onto social media because of many mixed up perceptions of what they were going to do if they actually get online. That's mostly it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Nagla. So let us turn it to the panel. I think there was lots lots of questions and comments. So
فالأول so let me speak in English. So thank you, Ms. Aziza, for your comments. Actually, we totally agree with you. Awareness is definitely a big challenge. We did not test awareness as our study this time. However, I wonder about this tiny line between awareness and social norms, right? Because in many cases, for example, whenever you start talking with mothers, they would prefer to send their kids to stay with their mothers rather than sending them to nurseries. You can actually interpret this as like this is a social norm, but also they do not know what is the benefit of sending my kid to a nursery, right? So I completely agree, and this is what we hopefully will try to tackle in the further studies. Not only this, again, the food is one of the aspects that we start to realize it's the critical part of what we call the quality of the nursery itself. So for us, we have a wider definition of quality of nursery. We think quality about quality of teaching, quality of the infrastructure, as well as the quality of like providing meals that can ensure that children who are staying in the nursery for 6 or 7 hours are able to interact and to play and to have enough food that can give them the energy to understand and to interact with other children. So we completely agree with you and everything you said here. I don't know what's the third point you want to say? Yeah.
So thank you for these great questions and comments. I'll start with the male preference. Certainly there's some preference in fertility, but what we found and what other studies have found in terms of enrollment in early childhood care and education is that that is gender equitable, and we even see that throughout the school system at this point in Egypt is there's a strong norm for gender equity in education, which gives me some hope for thinking about, given the progress we've made in terms of gender equity in education, maybe we can make some progress in employment one of these days as well. And to speak a little bit too to the point in terms of the need for recognition and the importance of early childhood development, I do think there's not enough evidence, specifically from Egypt's context, about what parents think about development. The research I know from Morocco, from elsewhere in the Arab world, is that parents don't realize they're really impacting development during those early years, so they may not know the importance, because parents do really care about education, but they may not perceive or think of, nursery as a component of education. So that's something to think about and work on in terms of norms as well. And I think very much to Naveen Osman's point, certainly we have this 2 kilometers, maybe too far. So what is access? We were talking about earlier. It may be that you need to be able to walk to the nursery for there to be effective access, particularly in Cairo, right, where travel distances can be challenging. So that's something to really think about going forward. And we'll be talking about and thinking about really what to do next in this intervention, but also in other interventions, and to maybe look at self-employment as more reconcilable with caregiving responsibilities. So income, someone else was speaking to this point, sort of income generation, activities that are home-based may be easier to reconcile with family responsibilities. In terms of the questions from the UNICEF team member on the nursery quality, all of the nurseries included were NGO nurseries that were registered, so licensed formal nurseries. And at least in our initial sort of implementation work, they appeared to be high quality relative to nurseries in general, but certainly measuring quality in nurseries in Egypt and getting some better data on quality is an area for future work as well. So I think that's quite important. To your question on the education level of mothers, most of them, so these were low-income areas in Greater Cairo. The modal education level most commonly was secondary. There were less than 20% higher education, and then a fair chunk, the remainder, with less than secondary education. So it was a mix of education levels. But given that the sort of typical mother was a secondary graduate, her job aspirations didn't necessarily match what was available. So that was one of the constraints we were seeing. Bruno, do you want to add anything?
Not much, but just I wanted to flag that this preference for boys is not specific to MENA country. Actually, Esther Duflo has a paper in which she discussed the issue of missing girls and explore all the different reasons for which at all age there are missing women. So that's so I can give you the reference of this paper if you want. And yes, it's true that we want to explore the issue regarding the distance, because as Abderrahman has shown, we made a catchment area around each nursery, and then we randomly pick GPS coordinate. So we have a household around the nursery randomly chosen. So we will be able to explore whether the take-up of nurseries is better when, by chance, the household are closer to the nursery. But given the fact that we have 4%, I think it won't be. Actually, I made a bit on the back of the envelope computation corresponding to your point, and I thought that maybe we can multiply the take-up by 2 or 3, but not much. And so I think it won't be enough to see a massive interest for nursery. But this is definitely something that we will explore.
Okay, let us take a final round of questions because we have 10 minutes. So I'm asking the people to keep their questions short. I have Mr. Mazen. I have so then Mr. Mazen, Ms. Ines, yourself, and then Nicholas, and then we will have to close after that. So please keep your questions short. So, Mr. Mazen. Mr. Mazen, if he is not in the room, because I got this from the, please go to Ms. Ines, please.
My name is Ines Omar. I am a chair of an NGO working in rural Giza and dedicated to teaching early childhood education. One idea that maybe you used or maybe you did not use in order to increase mothers' interest in putting their children in nurseries is having them aware how important it is, which you did, of course, but on the other side, mothers mainly don't want to send their children to nurseries before the age of 2, and nurseries don't want to accept children before the age of 2. So this time of 2 years that is lost, I think that whatever study you should make should include mothers teaching and making them aware of how to deal with their children in these 2 critical years before they send them to kindergarten. We as Egyptians always feel that in the first 2 years the child should be with the mother and not taken out. So I think that in your future study, if you can incorporate this teaching of mothers about the first 2 years, that should increase their interest in sending their children to nurseries after that. I hope you can consider this suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, can we go to the other table? Dr. Ines Higazi. No. Here.
Okay. شكرا جزيلا للبرزنتيشنز والدراسة الرائعة.
Can you introduce yourself?
إيناس حجازي، مديرة برنامج تنمية الطفولة المبكرة في يونيسف. بشكر حضراتكم كتير لأنه احنا فعلا في مصر محتاجين evidence based interventions في هذا القطاع الهام جدا. حاجة صغيرة بس إنه أغلب الحضانات اللي تابعة للجمعيات الأهلية بينتهي العمل فيها بدري جدا على الساعة 12 1 حاجة زي كده يعني. فهل احد الاليمنتس اللي اتكلمت عنها كارولين في البرزنتيشن بتاعتها انه اللوجيستكس وساعات العمل وطول ساعات العمل ده حاجه بتاثر على انه الامهات يقدروا يودوا اولادهم ولا لا، فدي احد المشاكل. حاجه تانية يعني بفكر فيها، هل اي حد من الامهات اللي اشتغلتوا معاها كانت بتشتغل وخرجت من الشغل عشان بقى عندها طفل بتراعيه؟ لانه كتير كمان جدا من السيدات اللي بيبقوا موجودين في الليبر ماركت they drop out. It's not only that they have never been engaged in the labor market but also they drop out. فدي برضو احد المشاكل. فانا مش عارفه هل من الامهات كان في ناس بتشتغل واضطروا انهم يقعدوا في البيت ولا كلهم ما اشتغلوش قبل كده. شكرا.
Thank you. هنا ادهم في نفس الترابيزه هناخد 2 more questions هنا وبعدين نيكولاس.
دكتور داليا، جمعية شروق مصر. أنا كان عندي سؤال على هل عملتوا يعني المكان اللي اخترتوه تفتحوا فيه الحضانات دي أو اللي كانت حضانات اتأسست أو لسه هتتأسس، على أي أساس أو المعايير اللي اخترتوا فيها المكان؟ تاني حاجة، اللي عمل السيرفاي أو الاستبيانات أو المقابلات مين اللي عملها؟ وكانت العينة أساسا كام؟ لأن كان في البرزنتيشن اتعرض كان بتقول فيه 1000 مقابلة. طب هل كانت مقابلات بس ولا استبيانات؟ سؤال بالنسبه لفرص العمل، على حسب اللي اتقال في البرزنتيشن ان اغلب الخصائص للعينه او للناس اللي انتوا اشتغلتوا معاهم تعليم ابتدائي اعدادي مثلا تعليم متوسط. طب فرص العمل اللي كانت متقدمه لهم قد ايه؟ يعني غالبيه فرص العمل بالنسبه للعينه دي محتاجه شغل اقلها 12 ساعه، والحضانه زي ما قالت الاستاذه او الدكتوره 6 ساعات او 4 ساعات. ايه فرص العمل؟ وهل في هل في حالات بجد زي ما بنقول مثلا قصص نجاح ناس بجد اتوظفت؟ وهل في فرص عمل كانت من المنزل يعني ساعدتوا ده؟ وبالنسبه لسؤال جوده الحضانه، ازاي طورنا الحضانه؟ هل الحضانات كانت لسه جديده احنا اسسنا حضانات جديده ولا كانت اوريدي حضانات قائمه واتطورت؟ ولو اتطورت عملنا ايه الاليات اللي اتعملت للتطوير؟ وشكرا.
شكرا. نيكولاس.
Thank you. Nicholas Boudet, analyst with the World Bank. So I was thinking about the women who did take up the intervention.
Can you remove the mask because we can't hear you?
Sorry. So about the women who did take up the intervention, or even those who didn't, are there any indications that they started conversations around early childhood education or female labor force participation that centered on social norms and how much they were limiting them? I'm thinking of the example in Saudi Arabia where it was found that pluralistic ignorance could be dealt with in the way that people had the perception that others in the society had a stronger belief in social norms limiting women's participation in the labor force than they actually did. So did these interventions start conversations around how these social norms limited women's choices? Thank you.
Thank you. So who wants to start? I think there were many questions about how long the day is, the 0 to 2, how did you choose the nurseries, what type of, was it questionnaire or interviews, and the types of jobs offered, and so there were many questions.
So I'll start by trying to answer the questions that I remembered and I wrote up. So probably I may answer not must. You asked for what's the criteria for selecting the NGOs. Actually, all the NGOs were selected according to criteria by MOS. The Ministry of Subsidiarity actually developed criteria for selecting NGOs, and all what we did that we picked NGOs that were basically selected before by MOS, and they were even any renovation within the nurseries were based on MOS criteria. We did interviews or questionnaires. With these questionnaires, we did a very lengthy questionnaire, something around, I would say, 45 to 30 minutes with each household. So quite intense. We asked a lot of questions. And we did this one time at least with each household. And we followed this also by phone interviews. So quite intense interviews. Mothers' qualifications. Yeah, we basically, we understand mother qualifications. And based on the mother qualifications, this is exactly how for us now used to match them to jobs are suitable or applicable to their qualifications, right? So we understand that most of them are blue collar, but this is exactly what the type of jobs that we offer to mothers. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions. Do you have any other thing for North Masr at least? Okay, perfect. So Caroline can answer the rest.
All right, I'll try to answer at least some of the rest. So I think it's a very interesting point that there's a strong norm, and we see this in terms of nurseries enrollment, that before age 2, children should be with their mothers. But this is certainly a challenge for women to work. It means women would have to leave the labor force while they had young children and couldn't necessarily be employed. It's very much an interesting question and perhaps the subject of a future study, whether you can have larger early childhood development improvements from programs that help parents parent better at home or that use center-based care, and that's potentially a subject for future research. But I think it's a very important point that a number of folks raised in terms of matching the working hours of the job to the day of the nursery. There's a lot of research showing the importance of that. And sort of to that same point, many of the mothers in our sample had worked in the past, not the majority, but some of them had worked in the past, and it's very, very common to leave work at an anticipation of marriage when you're going to have those caregiving responsibilities. And the challenge is, can we bring those mothers back to the labor force? What does it take to do so that they can reconcile those different roles? And to Nicolas's question on the social norms, so the study you were mentioning in Saudi Arabia that shows that people perceive social norms to be more conservative than they actually are, and that sharing that information can help create change, is certainly something we'll think about for social norms interventions going forward. But we did see in our study social norms that were not necessarily very supportive of nursery care and not necessarily very supportive of women working in the jobs that are readily available. So that's certainly a challenge that constrains female labor force participation. Bruno, did you want to add?
Yes, just a few points. Thanks a lot for all your comments and questions. So I think something that we will, as I said, this is just preliminary results that we have. And there are absolutely additional analysis that we want to do. And among this additional analysis is heterogeneity analysis. So we want to explore the distance, about the take-up, the distance to the nursery, but as well the age of the youngest children. And this can be an additional factor for which households do not bring their children to a nursery. So probably this disappointing, maybe this disappointing result about 4% might be less disappointing when we take into account a criterion such as the distance to the nursery or the age of the youngest children. Among the other things that we want to do is about this question for logistics. We want to explore the type. When we did our baseline survey, we asked the mothers about their search criteria. That is where they want to find a job, the time that they are ready to commute, and the type of occupation, the wages, and all those aspects. And we want to be sure that the job offers which were proposed by Forasna match with those search criteria. So this is an important step in being sure that we can discard this aspect of unmatched preferences. And as well, we want also to do something like a cost-benefit analysis from the point of view of the household, but on paper. Because we have the fee which are associated with the participating in the nursery. We also know the size of the subsidy which will be provided to the, by our program. And we have also the reservation wage of the mother. So we will be able to see whether or not participating in the labor market without the fee or with the fee is a good deal for the household. So there are all those aspects that we want to also explore now to better understand our results. So thanks for your question.
So if I may add, in conclusion, actually, the researcher here, all of us believe that ECD is super important topic, extremely important, it needs a lot of help. However, our conclusion that we see so far is that a single intervention or a couple of interventions will not be enough. It needs more of a holistic approach. It needs to be tackled from different aspects. This exactly matches what the minister said today. We need to think about multi-dimensional poverty. We need to think about any issue from multi-dimensional perspectives. This is exactly what we are trying and hoping to do. Right? It's super, super important, but it's clear that's a very sophisticated issue, cannot be solved by one or two interventions only.
Thank you, Abdurrahman. I think this is a very good closure to the to the panel, what you said at the end. So thank you very much, and thank you, Bruno and Caroline, and thank you everyone for your rich questions. We will take a break for 30 minutes, and we come back at 12:30. Thank you.